everyone, today we're going to be reviewing the Morphe X Jeffree Star palette. Now, I have just done 10 looks with this palette, so if you want to see that video, I will link that in the corner so you can check that out after. But I feel like I have a decent enough idea about the formula of this to at least tell you a little bit about this if you were wondering about getting this palette. I'll try to keep this video pretty short because there's not going to be any eye looks and this is just going to be my review of the palette. Now, normally in these videos where I have done my 10 looks and I go into my review, I will review all of the shades individually, but I don't feel like I need to do that in this video because I feel like a lot of the mattes are the same formula as well as a lot of the shimmers are the same formula, so I kind of just want to generalize the formulas a little bit and just talk about the way that I've experienced it. Obviously you might have different experiences than me, and it also depends a lot on like your application techniques and what kind of looks you like to do. So let's just get into this. So I just want to start off by talking about the shimmer formula in this palette. I'm not going to mention the glitter in this review because I simply haven't used it. I don't like using glitter on my eyes. Glitters are not eye safe. I don't care what people do or what they say, but they are not eye safe. So I didn't use this glitter just because glitter scares me, so that's basically it. But as for the rest of these shimmers, I found that when I was using them, there's a couple that kind of stand out to me, but let me just talk about like in general with the shimmer formula. I found that a lot of the shimmers in this palette are just kind of sheer, but they do build, but they're not super intense, if that makes sense. Like you can get them to be nice and opaque if you layer them a lot, but they're never going to be that super foiled, shimmery, in-your-face kind of formula. Like I said, there are some standout shades for me when it comes to the shimmers, and that would be Girl, Custom Rims, and Drive Through. I found all of those to really foil very nicely. I do use Fix Plus with most of my shimmers, and I found those to become the most intense when I did spray them and put them on my eyes. So those were definitely like the favorite formula, the shimmer formula in this palette, the ones that I enjoyed using the most. Most of these other ones are just kind of, they're just kind of a basic shimmer. I felt like it's very Morphe quality. I know a lot of people are like wanting to compare this to Jeffree Star, but I feel like you can't really compare this formula to Jeffree's formula because Jeffree's formula is by far superior to this, and I definitely feel like this is Morphe quality with Jeffree's name on it. That's not to say that it's a bad palette. There are definitely some duds in this palette that I don't think are amazing, but none of the shadows are like really bad, if you know what I mean. They're all like workable. It just depends how you work with them. So the shimmer shadows in this palette that I probably like the least is going to be Wand Noise, which is this kind of shimmer up here, but it's honestly more of a satin. It doesn't have much of a reflection to it. It's just very satiny, you know what I mean? Like it's not, let me just give you a swatch of this. It's just not very impactful. Like it's the kind of shimmer that you would see in like very high-end quads that a lot of people use to, you know, do like a one color eye look with. They blend it into their crease and stuff. That's not what I like to do. I don't like using shimmers in my crease, so if you're someone who likes to do that, you'd probably love that shade. But for me, when I use a shimmer, I want it to be on my lid and I want it to be very intense and very there, but I don't feel like I get that from this shade. I feel like it's a little bit lackluster, and it makes me not know how to use it because if I don't want to use it on my lid, if I don't feel like it's good enough in my lid, how can I really use that in my crease when I don't really have any darker shimmer shades to kind of deepen that up with? I feel like it's weird to go in with a satin in the crease and deepen it up with a matte. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's something I need to play around with, but that's just not like the kind of techniques that I use when I do my makeup. So for me, that shade was just not really what I prefer in a palette, so I didn't really end up using it a lot. I did use it in a look that I wasn't happy with, that I scratched, because I did use it in my crease and I didn't like how it looked. So that's not my favorite shade in this palette. And just something else that I want to mention with the shimmers here is that I feel like so many of these shimmers are basically the same on the eyes, and I'm mainly talking about this row of shimmers right here. Now obviously this is a matte, but if you look at all of these 4 shimmers, I find them all to be so similar. Like, yeah, they do have different undertones to them, but at the same time I feel like if you just had this shimmer right here, the thing is, like, you can mix them with other shimmers, if you know what I mean. So I could use this champagne shimmer to lighten up, say, this green, and I would basically get this. So in that sense, I don't really feel like I need this shimmer. I know, probably an unpopular opinion, but I feel like you can edit down palettes to a point where you don't need to have two shades that if you mix them together is going to make the color that's in the palette, because it would just free up room for something else. But it just feels like a lot of repetition to me. Like, yes, if you look at this in the pan, they all look different, you know what I mean? But when you put them on the eyes, a lot of them are just kind of going to blend in together and look like one color. And so there's a lot of colors in this palette that I just didn't really reach for, other than just to review them, if that makes sense. Because I wouldn't normally have probably used this shade right here, because I have this one and this one, and so I'm like, well, I don't need all of those. So in that sense, I feel like this palette didn't have to be this big. And I have had a lot of comments say, you know what, I like big palettes, I like when there's a lot of options, and that's totally understandable. I totally get that. I always have unpopular opinions when it comes to reviewing palettes, because I'm picky. I like small palettes, I like more curated color stories, and for me this palette is just a little bit just like overwhelming, and like I don't need all of this, but I did buy this palette, so I really shouldn't complain. But these are just like my thoughts when working with this palette. I did get so many requests to review this, which is why I ended up buying this palette. I wouldn't have bought this palette otherwise, simply because it is so big, but I did have a good time playing with this. I thought this was fun. I think that this palette is probably for someone who don't necessarily have the biggest eyeshadow collection. I don't think that a lot of these colors are really like that unique. Like, I feel like I could dupe this whole palette with the collection that I have, and I would say the colors that are probably the most unique in this is this kind of dirty lime green down here. This is a great shade. This is probably one of my favorite mattes. So the favorite mattes that I thought were like standouts in this palette were Wake and Bake, Hi Dude, and Fast Lane. I thought all of those mattes performed beautifully. They built up nicely, they were easy to blend into other colors, they layered well. That couldn't really be said for a lot of these other mattes. I thought the rest of the mattes, some of them were just a little bit sheer, and they had a hard time like building on top of other shadows. So most of the time when I used this palette, I had to go dark to light instead of light to dark. And I know that's not really the order that a lot of people do their makeup in, but I felt like this palette just performed better that way. And I can see a lot of people being a little bit annoyed and like having problems with shades being patchy or just not sticking to their eyes, and that's how I felt when I used Vroom Vroom, which is the gray here. I tried to layer this on top of the pink, I think it was, when I did a halo eye, and it had a really hard time building on top of something that was already on my eye, but used alone in the crease, it was totally fine. And that's how I felt with most of these shadows. Most of them perform really good as like the first shadow that you put down, but as soon as you start trying to layer things on top and like blending and building, that's when you seem to have a bit of an issue with these mattes. Like I said, they are a little bit sheer, which is why they don't build that well, and it only really works as like the first color or the only color on your lid, or in your crease, I should say. And so I don't know, it's not my favorite matte formula. Do I think it's terrible? No, I definitely think it's workable, but like I said before, if you have a very big makeup collection, I don't think you need this palette unless you want to get it to support Jeffree and Morphe, then I totally understand. But if you want to get this because you feel like it's a unique palette, it's really not that unique. I would say sit down with your collection and like have a picture of this next to you and try to dupe out these shadows, because I feel like most of these are quite dupable. And I also just think that you can find the same colors and better formulas out there. So I guess those are going to be my thoughts on this. I mean, would I recommend it? It just depends. It really depends. This is not the kind of palette that I would say that everybody should run out and buy because you're gonna think it's amazing. I think it's gonna be kind of hit or miss whether or not you like this palette. I think some people are going to love this. I think some people are going to be quite disappointed because the formula is not up to par with what Jeffree usually puts out. So I don't know. I mean, I don't regret getting this palette, but I also don't see myself ever pulling for this palette for a particular color because of the formula being great or because the color is very unique. Like, I just don't see myself really ever doing that. So I mostly just bought this to, you know, review, and I did have fun playing with it, but it's probably just going to end up in my collection now and never getting used again. So that's basically my thoughts on this palette. Now, If you got this palette, let me know how you feel about it. I would love to know like other people's opinions about this. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know, because I feel like a lot of people are going to maybe read the comments and they would like to hear other people's opinions. So if you have an opinion, leave it down below so other people can read it. And that's going to be it for today's video. So if you want to see some other things that I have on my channel, you can either click on this video right here or this one. And if you're new to my channel, I would love if you would consider subscribing, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.